You're standing in the shower, replaying a conversation that already happened. You're telling yourself exactly what you should have said. The words form perfectly in your head, complete with tone, complete with pauses, complete with a version of the other person's face reacting to your comeback. You didn't decide to do this, it just started on its own, the way it always does. But the real answer for why this happens is far stranger than you're just thinking. That voice narrating your life isn't thought in its purest form. It's speech. Your speech. Wearing a disguise. Here's the strange part. The regions of your brain that light up when you talk to yourself in your head are almost identical to the regions that light up when you talk out loud. Your motor cortex twitches. Your throat sometimes moves. Just slightly. Just enough that a sensitive electrode could pick up the signal. You are, in a very real sense, whispering to yourself. Constantly, without sound. Your body is halfway through the act of speaking every single time you think in words. Where did this come from? Why would a species evolve a voice that only it can hear? Watch a 4-year-old play alone with blocks. Listen closely and you'll hear them narrating everything out loud. This one goes here. No, not there. Now the red one on top. Psychologists call this private speech. And one of the first people to take it seriously was a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky, working in the 1920s and 1930s. Other researchers at the time dismissed this kind of chatter as meaningless noise, a habit children would simply grow out of. Vygotsky disagreed. He proposed that children aren't talking for no reason. They're thinking out loud because they haven't yet learned how to think any other way. For a toddler, language starts as a tool for talking to other people. Slowly, piece by piece, it becomes a tool for talking to yourself. Vygotsky believed this outward chatter doesn't disappear as children grow older. It goes underground. Somewhere around age 7, most children stop narrating out loud in front of others and start narrating silently, inside their own heads instead. The voice didn't vanish. It moved indoors. And it never really left. That's the origin story. But here's where it gets interesting for you right now, as a fully grown adult who still does this every waking hour. Decades after Vygotsky, a British psychologist named Charles Fernyhough set out to test whether the old theory held up using tools Vygotsky never had access to. Brain scanners. Fernyhough and his colleagues asked adults to talk to themselves silently while lying inside an fMRI machine, then compared the results to what happened when the same people spoke the same words out loud. The overlap was significant. Inner speech activates Broca's area, the same region of the brain responsible for producing spoken language in the first place. Your brain isn't running some separate, quieter version of thought when you talk to yourself. It's running the exact same machinery it uses to talk to another human being, just with the volume physically switched off. So why does this matter to you? Because it means your inner voice isn't a mystical stream of pure consciousness floating above your biology. It's a repurposed skill, a leftover habit from being 3 years old and narrating your own hands as you stacked blocks on the living room floor, now quietly running in the background of your adult mind 24 hours a day, whether you asked for it or not. Think about how strange that actually is. You carry a version of your own childhood speech patterns with you, permanently, playing on a private loop that only you will ever hear. Every grocery list you rehearse, every argument you replay, every pep talk you give yourself before walking into a room, all of it runs on hardware built for talking to your parents about blocks. But here's the twist almost nobody expects, the part that upends everything you probably assumed about how minds work. Not everyone has this voice at all. For years, researchers simply assumed inner speech was universal, a basic feature of being conscious, like having a heartbeat. Then, a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt started interrupting ordinary people at random moments throughout their day. He'd beep them unpredictably and ask them to report immediately exactly what had been happening inside their mind the instant before the beep went off. His method is called descriptive experience sampling, and what it revealed surprised almost everyone, including some of the participants themselves. A meaningful percentage of people report almost no verbal narration in their minds at all. Their thoughts arrive as images, as feelings, as wordless impressions they only translate into language later when they need to explain themselves to someone else out loud. Some people live their entire lives quietly assuming everyone else thinks in words, exactly the way they do. Other people live their entire lives assuming nobody thinks in words because they never have. Neither group realizes how different their inner world actually is until someone describes theirs out loud. And the other person stops and says, "Wait, that's not what happens inside your head." So the voice you hear, if you hear one, isn't a universal feature of being human. It's closer to a dialect. Some brains speak it constantly, narrating every errand and every anxiety in full sentences. Some brains barely speak it at all, running instead on something closer to pure feeling. And for the people who do have it, that voice turns out to be something you can actually train, not just something you passively listen to, something you can use on purpose, like a tool you didn't know you were holding. A researcher named Ethan Kross has spent years studying what he calls chatter, the anxious, looping version of inner speech that spirals when you're under pressure, replaying an argument on repeat, or rehearsing a disaster that hasn't even happened yet. Cross found something almost too simple to believe, something that sounds more like a trick than a scientific finding. The pronoun you use when you talk to yourself changes how much power that voice has over you. When people coached themselves through a stressful moment using the word I, telling themselves, "I can handle this, I need to calm down," their stress and anxiety stayed elevated throughout the task. But when people switched to using their own name, or the word you instead, telling themselves, "You can handle this, you've done harder things than this," their stress measurably dropped. Their performance on difficult tasks improved. Cross calls this distanced self-talk, and the theory behind it loops right back to where this whole story started, with Vygotsky and a child narrating blocks. Talking to yourself in the second or third person recreates the original relationship your inner voice was built from in the first place. A parent talking to a child, a coach talking to a nervous athlete before the biggest moment of their season, someone standing just outside the panic, calmly narrating a way through it, one instruction at a time. In other words, the voice in your head began its existence as someone else's voice, guiding you through a world you didn't understand yet, long before you were capable of guiding yourself. And even now, decades later, fully grown, fully independent, it still works best when it remembers exactly where it came from. So think back to that shower. The rehearsed argument, the perfect comeback forming word by word in a voice that sounds exactly like you, but isn't quite the same thing as actually speaking. Now you know what's really happening underneath it. Your motor cortex is quietly firing the same signals it would use if you opened your mouth. Your Broca's area is doing its job in complete silence. And somewhere underneath all of it, if you're one of the people who hears words at all, is a 4-year-old narrating blocks on a living room floor who never actually stopped talking. They just learned eventually how to whisper. You're still standing in the shower, still replaying the conversation. But now, when that voice starts up again, you don't just hear it. You know exactly where it came from, whose voice it was borrowed from first, and exactly how much power you have to change what it says to you next.